Got to be fast and quiet. So how many guys we got at MDC?
3, so we can put who we need, where we need.
You know, we got enough guys in the higher out.
No way.
There's no need. Hitters ain't the problem. Taking out all these guys is doable. Back in Bin Laden wasn't this complicated.
Show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the LIEDAHO4 case. And I thought this was interesting because in the book, Broken Plea, that I have so many issues with, there is some information in there that I believe is very interesting. And there's some information that's not in there that I believe is even more interesting. But first, let's start with what I think is interesting that I read in this book, because y'all know, if you followed me, that probably a couple of days after they released all the Idaho State Police reports, I went through and I scoured them. That's where I found Mowich and who I believe was Farley. Other people disagree on that. But I also found what I believed was the mother of one of the victims and what she was saying when she was interviewed up in jail. And I'll be dang if that book doesn't actually have the excerpt from that particular police report to verify that we were exactly correct. Check this out. For those of you that remember, I went through this police report first thing, November 20th. I said, possibly Kara Kay interview at Kootenai County Jail. November 20th. I said, well, that was about the time that she was arrested, so that would make sense. And it was a police report that said that on the 20th, Detective Timothy Snell and Sergeant Jess interviewed who I thought was Kara Kernodle at the Kootenai County Jail. I said, well, because that's definitely her date of birth. And even though that said down here under the witness, it said relationship acquaintance, which I thought was interesting, which made me unsure if I was, totally correct in this. Born in 79, age 43, Coeur d'Alene, but relationship, it listed a relationship as acquaintance. I was like, well, I can't verify that that's Kara. But we went through and we tried to decipher with all of these blacked out boxes what the heck was, what was being said. And I said, look, it's possible that I was advised that the atrocity had something to do with having something to do with Kara's criminal interactions. And I was advised by Kara during something, she made statements regarding something. We couldn't even figure it out, but we knew it was something good. And then it went on to say that we deciphered it was likely Jeffrey Kernodle that said that there was statements made that Xana Kernodle's death better not be due to Kara Kernodle snitching. And that's all we could ever figure out. We didn't figure we'd ever be able to see in these boxes. But I'll be dang, looky here. I went ahead and typed it out word for word from Whitcomb's book. And what it actually says up here, it says, I was advised that Kara Kernodle had been recently arrested by the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office due to her having a warrant for her arrest involving D-Rugs. I was advised by the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office Sergeant Solar Larson during her arrest that Kara Kernodle had made statements regarding the homicide of her daughter, Xana Kernodle, and her drug involvement, somehow being involved. Not Xana's drug involvement, Kara's. So Kara comes in, and you can see it actually happened before being able to activate the audio recording device, right? So the statement she was actually making is before those sheriffs could or those ISP guys could turn on their audio device to record it. Now, why do you think that is? Why are they interviewing a witness without any audio? Well, because they know there's protected information that's going on. They don't record that. But during that audio, according to Whitcomb, Kara Kernodle made statements regarding the homicide and Kara's drug involvement somehow being involved. Kara knew from the very beginning why this freaking thing happened. And it goes on to say that during their 9-minute conversation, they only spent 9 minutes, right, on Kara. You think that's correct? Yeah. How many minutes did the FBI spend with Kara, do you think? But their 9-minute conversation, Kara said she was unaware of anyone that would want to hurt her daughter, and added that her ex-husband had specifically asked if she had any involvement with the cartels. He wanted to know if Xana could have been killed as a result of her mother's exposure to organized crime. Kara has never been implicated in her daughter's death. No, she's never been implicated in it because y'all forced her to be an informant. And it ain't cartels, it's organized crime, though, for sure. And we'll talk about that more, but I found it interesting that Whitcomb would even address this in the book. And I appreciate him doing that because now we know that Kara, undoubtedly, before the audio recording was activated, told him what she really believed, and that was Kara's drug involvement had something to do with her daughter's unaliving. And now we also know that Jeffrey was all over Kara about her exposure to organized crime and did it have any involvement with his daughter's death, and it better not be due to her snitching. So when you hear her go on to content creators podcast and say that, well, Jeffrey told me that there was a fight at the frat house and all that kind of crap, and you find out that Jeffrey didn't even talk to Xana since Friday, well, now you start to get the real story and you start to get the reasons why these people would lie. All right, up to the sentencing of Brian Kohberger when Jeffrey Kernodle went in there half drunk and lied again. Here's the real story if you look hard enough for it. It isn't the frat boys on steroids. So I find that very interesting, but I find this next part even more interesting, which makes me kind of, a little bit froggy whenever I talk about it, because they always point out these small things about Kara, but they never, ever, 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 any of them ever dive in to Maddie's parents. And they got to know at this point. It goes through all that about Kara, but when it gets to Maddie, look, here's what Whitcomb reports on. Beyond the workplace, investigators determined that Maddie's father, Benjamin, and mother, Karen, had divorced and remarried. That's it. No more detail whatsoever. And what drives me crazy is the first, I think, year of this thing, maybe over a year, it might have been almost 2 years. Nobody knew about Benjamin's real criminal history. All they knew was he had some minor things, because when you looked up his name into the system and you put in Ben, it didn't pull up but just a couple of small things. And it wasn't for a long time until I actually typed in Benjamin, and I don't even know what made me do it. I just happened to type in his whole name one time, and when I did, bam, everything pulled up, and I went, my goodness, look at this. But nobody's ever brought it up but old Pav. And here's what we now know, and I'm going to take you on a trip back in the past, give you the information, and then add a little bit that you haven't seen. Hold on to your hats, folks. Now, on to the story. Timelines and motives. We're going to start with the major arrest that happened in March of 2023 when they announced the indictment and takedown of the entire Aryan family group. And you can see the mass arrests in Washington of the drug ring tied to Aryan prison gang. But you have to look deep into the end for you to find the beginning. You see, it happened in March of 2023 when the arrest was made. But this quotation from the FBI says this operation was the culmination of 1.5 years of great investigative work, said Richard A. Kaladi, special agent in charge of the FBI's Seattle field office. Now, where does that sound familiar? The FBI's Seattle field office, a year and a half of great investigative work. I believe it was the Gilter himself in his book, Damning Brian Koberger, in the chapter that actually makes sense when he talks about the defense's investigators and where they first started investigating, and it had something to do with that FBI's Seattle field office. And what did that chapter actually state out of that book?
The defense investigators' first stop was the Seattle DEA field office, and the overview they offered was by all accounts a tale of cutthroat international intrigue. It was the story of a pipeline that ran from China, where the fentanyl precursor chemicals were produced, to the sinister Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels in Mexico, which manufactured the drugs and then smuggled the too often lethal product to their distribution networks in northwestern urban hubs such as Seattle and Spokane. Next, with the eager help of a freelance army of small-time distributors, the drugs reached into the seemingly wholesome all-American counties and college towns like Moscow, Idaho.
But the Seattle DEA field office director said you have to go back a year and a half from the arrest of the Aryan family to find the beginning of the investigation. And it's not hard to do when you find the crossover arrest that was made during the takedown of what was known as the Fetty Bros. They were taken down in October of 2021. But the person that was bringing the narcotics from Arizona up to the Seattle-Tacoma area and supplying those Fetty Bros was none other than Mr. Cervantes of the Aryan family. And he was arrested on July 1st, 2021 in Oregon. He was stopped with 50,000 of those counterfeit M30 oxycodone pills in a car belonging to one of the leaders of the drug operation. That was one of the first arrests that later led to the arrest of the Fetty Bros, along with the help of their confidential informant. And that's where the timeline begins. The Aryan family starts their drug trafficking operation in 2021. Then in July, the first arrest is made. That was Cervantes. Then in October, associates, the Fetty Bros, are arrested due to confidential informants. But the drug trafficking operation known as the Aryan Family Group continues to operate and grow. On to 2022, when this particular sale of the Aryan family, also known as the Omerta Group, has a set route with set individuals operating the route, and they are amassing millions of dollars, enough for the leaders of the group to purchase 3 different businesses, set up LLCs to wash the money along with all of the cash proceeds they are receiving. In all accounts, a very successful operation. And they would bring the drugs into the Seattle-Tacoma area, traffic them across the corridor into Spokane, where I believe the next step of the operation takes over. And that was the father of one of the victims in the atrocity. And then through his associate, we know as the mother of one of the victims in the atrocity, the narcotics are then transported to the 2 mules, Mr. Farley and Miss Rhodes, who brings the narcotics through Moscow to Julietta to the next step, which is a gentleman named Burroughs, who then finishes funneling the narcotics down to Boise to the rest of the Aryan Night group. And again, this is a very successful operation, and it is amassing a lot of money. Something big would need to happen to disrupt an operation such as this. Now, Gill, Slocum, and Cervantes' cell comes back on to the OCD ETF. That's the FBI, DEA, local, all the law enforcement involved in the operation. But they come back on their radar in October of 2022. However, something happened at the end of August of 2022 to set that in motion. And for 2 years, Gill and Associates had created a very successful drug trafficking operation to include making millions of dollars, opening several LLC businesses, and establishing associates to complete the trafficking routes, including buyers. And as you can see, Mr. Slocum, part of that group, he was only identified as a person of interest by the government on November 27, 2022, less than 4 months before their final arrest in March of 2023. Despite the government observing Mr. Bailey, Mr. Gill, Mr. Warren, and Mr. Cervantes for at least 2 years prior. So Slocum didn't come into the radar until closer to the end. As we're going to see later, they do that by way of getting his second phone tap on November the 23rd. But with this successful operation, what would cause them to want to uproot and move the entire operation to Arizona almost overnight? And that's where the timeline comes in for the father of one of the victims in the case and the stepmother. And when we look at their timeline, we have to go all the way back to April of, actually this should be 2020. But he is arrested on major charges and sentenced to a strict drug court probation program. As you can see, he was possession of a controlled substance with intent to deliver 2 counts and possession of paraphernalia with intent to use. These major charges landed him in a strict drug court probation, where if you violate your probation, you are sentenced on your charges. No sooner did he obtain that probation did he actually break it. The day after Ben is put on drug court probation, he's arrested again. He's given another chance and was resentenced back to drug court probation. So he had his one lifeline. The next day, he pulled that lifeline. If he messes up again, it's over for him. And that also is April of 2020, not 2022. But then in September of 2020, something else happened. He is arrested again, but instead of taking the charges, I believe a deal is made for his wife to take his charges. And that can be backed up looking into his record, because for no reason will it show under your name the arrest, and when you pull up the arrest, your name is not involved in it, but the woman you will later marry is. And it's clearly there for anybody to see in the Idaho court docs. This is where I believe that Mr. Ben is turned into a confidential informant. But also, his future wife had to take those charges, and she is put on probation, so now she's involved. So as long as she doesn't violate her probation, she'll be fine, right? But then in June of 2022, she is arrested again. Now it's serious because she was already on probation, and the charges she gets this time are much the same as her future husband had the year prior. And that is controlled substance possession, possession with intent to deliver, and again, paraphernalia with intent to use. So massive charges right here. When you're on probation, you're going to prison. What happens? In August of 2022, she's arraigned in district court and a trial date is set. And then if we jump over to September though, less than a month later, charges are dropped and reduced and she's given probation. Now, what happened between that August, I believe it was the 16th date, and September 7th? Something happened that allowed for this deal to be made. And dismissing the counts 2 and 3 to get that deal, something big must have happened. And you can bet it happened between her and her future husband. And what happened? Their associates just happened to be picked up on trafficking charges in Moscow right in between when that deal was made. Empty in the middle. Empty in the middle.
Farley has a Harley. Farley has a Harley.
in Bratland,
Empty in the middle. Empty in the middle.
Farley has a Harley. Farley has a Harley.
in Bratland, in Bratland.
Okay, members, you know me, I'm always working. But I've been working on the part of my theory that seems to get the most flack for some reason, which I believe has the most the most evidence around it, but that is the possible involvement of my guy Farley. I mean, I don't even have to go through and list all of the coincidences around him. I mean, his brother or his cousin's first cousin's husband is Gunderson. You know, his uncle's Larry Germer, best friends with Larry Germer, best friends with Scott Green. He works for Germer Construction, or did, that tore down the King Road house. He is, in my opinion, the absolute confidential. I mean, everything lines up for Farley. Even if somebody yelling, "I see you, Farley," at the crime scene. So what I've been working on is I started out and I took the photo of when he was arrested there just about a month prior to the atrocity in the mugshot photo. And I took this photo of this gentleman. And when you look at this gentleman in this photo, to me, it's a dead ringer for from Farley here. You can just tell he's quite a bit younger. So I've been using the AI and I've been trying to have it do comparisons, knowing that this was a picture taken in 2014 and this was him in 2022, and having them account for age and everything else, and I keep getting the same thing. Yes, they match. The man in the 2022 news photo, Tyson Farley, in the Orange LIEDAHO County Jail shirt, is the same person as the guy on the left in your earlier black and white photo. And while there's no way I can actually, just prove this, but one thing I can tell you, look at his upper lip here. Say he's got these small lips and he's got this very pronounced feature above his lips here, and between his lips and his nose. I forgot what that was called, but look how it goes, pronounced, boom, boom. And then you look at Farley's over here in this photo, and I mean, it's a dead ringer in my opinion. So I took and added a couple of more photos that were known, that were taken around the time that it was known. And I had them do it again. And so these new photos, especially the 2020 hard hat one and the recent bandana selfie, I don't have that one up here, significantly strengthened the match. And I'm now quite confident the guy on the left in your original black and white photos, Tyson Farley. And you may be asking why I say it's important to make this determination. It's because, this photo in 2014 comes from Corey Hatrock, the stepmother of one of the victims in the case. So I'm trying to figure out why she would have a picture that was important to her of a gentleman who Grok tells me is Tyson Farley, because that is a absolute direct connection. And then I'm always looking for things in this, and I see things that make me kind of shake my head too. Your thoughts about the photo match and about Farley on his chopper here. So this was step one of their deal process, and one of the first mistakes they made, but it certainly wouldn't be the last. Because once Farley was arrested, it would let Gil know that the heat was on, and he should think about moving a very successful operation. If the parents are the connection between Gil and Farley, until Farley was released, Gil wouldn't know who set Farley up and would still be talking to the parents. The parents could therefore relay what was said to law enforcement. And there is a specific period of time when this happens before Farley would have the opportunity to get back to him and let them know who set him up. And as you can see, what actually took down the Aryan family is in October of 2022, prior to the search warrants in December, agents met with a confidential source to discuss Gil and his operation. During the meeting, the confidential source told agents that Gill intended to move to Arizona while continuing his drug operation in Washington. The confidential source said Gill had acquired property in Arizona and wanted to run his drug distribution at the property. The confidential source also said Gill wanted to install a runway at the property and have one of his drug associates learn how to fly a plane so they could fly the drugs into and out of the area. The confidential source said Gill's intention was to have relocated to Arizona by 2023. Now, what are the key factors in this case that tells me that the person that you see in this document is the confidential source is none other than the father of one of the victims in the case? Well, there are three things that tell me that's true. Number one, the atrocity on King Road, where his daughter was one of the victims in the atrocity, is more than enough evidence for me on its own. But then there is point number two, and that is the timing of the atrocity along with everything we see with his records and the timing of when that confidential source started giving up information on the Gill cell is more than enough confirmation. But then there is this, and that's the fact that on November 7th, it's actually November 4th, 2022, those Fetty Bros that were originally set up were sentenced to federal prison over 20 years. So they already had one feather in their cap. But on top of all of that, this is the most validating thing in my opinion. Because what happened in October of 2022, you see up here on Google Earth, when you go to the house that they were living in at the time in Spokane Valley, which is this house right here, and you look at what Google Earth captured that had to be sitting there for a long time for Google Earth to capture it, and that is this Chrysler Pacifica sitting here with its driving lights on, monitoring the residents. And this is none other than a protection detail by those feds with who I believe to be one of the cowboys sitting right here in the passenger seat, watching that residence in a protection detail. And that is the final validating point. And if that's not enough for you, here's something else that True Crime Design uncovered. And imagine an operation set up, making all of that money, putting in all the effort to set up LLCs to wash that money. But then you know that they knew something was about to happen because Bryson and his wife signed a lease for the Buckeye residence in Arizona on November 21st, 2022. They were going to move the entire operation for some reason. Far before the wiretaps referenced in prosecution's testimony began on November 28th, 2022. This is when the lease began and Bryson and his wife Jordan began residency. They were in the process of moving the remainder of the items from Washington State residence to the Buckeye residence. This is Bryson's attorney trying to say why Bryson was moving, that he had no intent. But unless Bryson was psychic and knew they were going to wiretap him, how about Bryson knew who had snitched on him once Farley got out on furlough and came and let him know on October the 5th, and then subsequently serve a search warrant on his current residence? It is impossible to flee and relocate before those things have happened. Had he relocated before either the wiretap or search warrant was executed, that's more proof that he knew that he was being snitched on. And then finally, we've got the final validating point, and that is the fact that Slocum and his new phone, the defendant's phone, began interceptions on November 23rd of last year, meaning 2022. Now, what is significant about where they got his new phone number and began interceptions on the 23rd of November? Well, that just so happens to be one day after Farley was arrested in Spokane on November 22nd. Now, I'm not saying that Farley gave up Slocum, but once he was arrested, you can bet a simple grab of Farley's cell phone would have gave him Slocum's new contact information. Everything lines up perfectly. Rest in peace, sweet children. It was from no fault of your own.